fairly long time. So he's a senior Indian Police Service officer of 1992 batch. He is in the Delhi cadre, and he also did something very interesting. I mean, as you would sort of hear, Dr. Madan Mohan Oberoi, when I'm saying, so Dr. Oberoi actually did his PhD in cybercrime from IIT Delhi in 2002, when the term cybercrime itself was not very well known. So he does have a very strong technological passion, as well as I'll say knowledge about this whole domain. He's also got a Fulbright scholarship earlier when he went to University of Washington, and again he did a lot of work there on cybersecurity studies there. He's also worked in the UN peacekeeping missions globally. He also has other global exposure. Now, in addition to that, he was the head of Delhi Police Special Cell till some time back, and also has headed the Prime Minister's cybersecurity unit itself. Now, beyond all these things, one of the most important things that he has done is that he was instrumental in setting up the Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center, which is in short known as IC4. And he was also its first DG, Director General. He also worked as an advisor cyber in the Ministry of Home Affairs. So overall, if you see, he has got a lot of field experience. He's got a lot of experience in the central government, at the state government in Delhi, but also very importantly, a lot of international experience and exposure in this domain. So initially what I'm going to do this particular session is I'm going to request Dr. Oberoi to make a few opening remarks on how he sees the financial sector itself in terms of the vulnerabilities and some of the remedies, etc. And then we'll go through a few questions. And in the meanwhile, I'll also request all the audience, all the members of the audience, that in case you have any particular question, but please keep it limited and focused, keep it short, keep it relevant to this particular session. You could type that in the chat box, and then we'll take up some of those questions also. Thank you. So with that, Dr. Oberoi, welcome again at this particular event and this particular session of IMAI Pursuit 2021. And may I just request you to give an overview of how you see the financial sector and the way the frauds, etc., are sort of evolving and morphing over the past few years, and then we'll get into a slightly longer conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepak. The topic today is of this session is online financial frauds and law enforcement. And as we know, and very intuitively, we can guess that 2020 was a year which saw a major spike in online financial crimes. Just to give you a few statistics, I don't have Indian statistics, but FBI came out with their statistics that their Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3, saw around 8 lakh complaints in 2020 and losses of around $4.2 billion. The costliest category of crime or online financial fraud was business email compromise. It also saw emergence of various schemes related to COVID-19. UK has reported losses of around 1.26 billion pounds in 2020 related to online financial frauds. Singapore has reported losses of around 200 million. But more importantly, they have reported that banking-related phishing scams went up by 2,500% in 2020. Now, this is a phenomenal growth in terms of the crimes which are happening. And since another issue relating to this overall event is related to technology, let me give you a very brief input on how law enforcement is looking at technology. So we have what we call as a technology radar, where we try to map various developments, but not in terms of technical developments, but more in terms of three aspects. How are these technologies being used by law enforcement? How are these technologies being used by criminals? And how can we extract evidence out of these technological changes? For example, if a drone is used, how can we do forensics on drones? Those kind of three main aspects. And if we look at the broad trends which we have seen in terms of technology, they are, I would say, in five broad areas. First category, I would say, in terms of connectivity, whether it is 5G, cloud computing, big data, Internet of Things, etc. Second category, I would say, is digital disruption, where I would list items like dark web, cryptocurrencies, 3D printing, etc. Third is the AI, which would automatically include issues like deepfakes and other AI design malwares, etc. Fourth is autonomous machines like drones, robotics, etc. And lastly is the simulation-based developments like virtual reality, etc. Now, what we are also seeing is that law enforcement, being reactive by nature, is normally not prepared to embrace these kind of technological changes, more in terms of policy domain. How these technologies will impact their working, and most of the time they are silent spectators. So by the time the policies are framed, their voices have not even been voiced, I would say, and nobody knows what are the implications of these technological changes on law enforcement. Now, coming back to the financial frauds and why we witnessed such spikes of financial crime in 2020, I would just quickly summarize these and then stop at that point and wait for any queries which Deepak ji would have. So firstly, I would say with regard to 2020, lot of chaos caused by COVID-19 that led to so many opportunities for criminals that which were very efficiently exploited by them to launch attacks on the unsuspecting citizens. We also saw, because of the lot of online shifting of business, the changing e-commerce landscape led to more retail purchases shifting online. Many transactions which do not require credit card, they increased dramatically. Payments moved online. We also saw the much more sophisticated fraud tactics being used by criminals. And then three general points I would briefly mention. One is, which is not limited to 2020, but they are continuing for long. One is unclear legal jurisdiction in terms of criminals to justice. Second is what I was earlier mentioning, technological advancement. And lastly, and I would say most importantly, is lack of deterrence. What I mean by lack of deterrence is that the deterrence in terms of criminal space comes in terms of success through successful prosecutions. There have to be consequences on criminals for doing anything which they are trying to do in terms of launching frauds. Whereas in cyberspace, this conviction percentage globally, and it is not limited to India, is very low. And as a result, criminals work with a very high level of confidence that nothing is going to happen to them. So there's actually no deterrence. I had done a small study in around 3 years back, where no, not 3 years, 2016, 5 years back, where I found that globally the percentage of conviction in cybercrime cases was less than 10%. In many cases, it was around 1 to 2%. So what it meant was that criminals work with the 98% confidence level that nothing is going to happen. So there's no cost on any attempt. They can keep on trying to commit crime till they succeed. So with that kind of scenario, the expansion of attack surface, more people moving online, and lot of payments being made online, provided a perfect platform for criminals to increase their activities in 2020, and the trend is continuing in 2021. I think I'll pause here and maybe look at various questions which Deepak ji would have. Thank you.
Thank you. So the way you're saying is the conviction rate is very low. So that means that both the chances of getting caught as well as the imposition of any cost, which is either financial or otherwise in any other penal manner, is extremely low. And that's something which actually boosts the confidence and also the proliferation of these criminal gangs. So one particular thing that I wanted to ask you was this, that it's been exactly 26 months now since we had this WannaCry as a big ransomware thing in 2017. And then, of course, we had PETA just a few weeks later. Recently, again, of course, we had a few other the colonial pipeline and many others. Even in India, we have many such incidents, both part of the global attacks, but also perhaps more sporadic incidents also here. So what's been the main reason for this growth in the ransomware attacks, and especially I would say in the financial sector? I mean, how do you see what is happening and why it is happening and what people should be doing? Because that's again something that a lot of our audience is interested in. What is it that they should be doing?
So firstly, let's understand why ransomware has grown. And this is, firstly, I would say it is because it is giving very high returns in terms of a very small investment. Second is that the threshold of technical know-how to launch a cybercrime has gone down after cybercrime as a service model emerging in the dark web. So anybody can go there, buy their exploits and launch their own franchisee. So today, so many ransomware scripts are being sold on the dark web. Anybody can go there, buy them, and start extorting. Now, with this kind of a scenario, and with, as I was mentioning, lack of deterrence, the growth has been tremendous. In fact, ransomware has been categorized as a cottage industry because of all these factors. And this is the reason for huge growth there. Now, in terms of what is law enforcement doing? And there I would slightly be more critical about the way law enforcement has been working in terms of, although coming from the law enforcement background, I would say that we have been very reactive, typically waiting for the crime to happen and then trying to trace back and find the criminals. And this is, and we have been very, law enforcement as a community has been very hesitant about cyberspace as a domain. They were, I would not say fearful, but they were not very comfortable in this space. And they did not see that this is their domain and they need to be active here. Now, the approach, the two typical reactive approaches in the physical space are follow the money and work backwards from the scene of crime. Both these reactive approaches in cyberspace do not work. With the difficulty in attribution going backward from the scene of crime does not lead us anywhere with the IP address issues, with the issues related to cross-country jurisdictions and VPNs and dark web and all those things. Going backward is not the way where we will succeed. Following the money is also not working because of the things like cryptocurrencies becoming the main way of payments in criminal world. So this is not working. What is working, interestingly, is something on which police is very comfortable globally. And if we look at these some of the success stories across the world, we saw EncroChat in December 2020. Where a platform for encrypted messages was taken over by a group of law enforcement agencies from around 15 countries, and they monitored what is happening, and then they reacted, built up their own intelligence, and then they acted on that. Recently, you might have read there was a press release from FBI and Europol and 16 other countries that messaging platform Anom was launched by FBI. And they operated this encrypted messaging platform for quite some time, collected information, and based on that, it has led to a goldmine of information for action against criminals. To an extent that many of these countries had to launch recruitment drives to cope up with the increased number of cases which they have to follow. We also saw, if you mentioned about colonial pipeline case, we also saw how the ransom was paid, but also taken back from criminals. It is like in the physical space, in a case of kidnapping for ransom, you pay the ransom, but send a team who snatches the ransom back from the kidnappers. So all these are new methodologies, old methodologies used in a new domain by law enforcement after a long gap. There are some issues when we see these tactics in Indian context, because what these tactics are relying on getting intelligence through covert operation. Normally, when we talk about intelligence in cyber domain, many times we confuse them with surveillance. None of this requires surveillance. It is launch of covert operations, which, for example, what we do in combating terrorism. We never solve a case of bomb blast by picking up small evidences from the scene of crime and then from that tracing the terrorists. We normally develop our intelligence through different inputs and target them proactively before they act. And that is the way cyberspace also has to be dealt with. So there have to be legal safeguards for law enforcement to launch the covert operations, get more active. They have to be more comfortable with these domains, digital spaces, so that they can be present there to launch their own operations before the criminals act. Because once they have launched an attack, it is very difficult to react to that and be successful. So that is the broad area, I would say, that where we need to focus.
Okay, so what you're saying is that just like the criminals can sort of lure the unsuspecting users and corporates and others to sort of share some information, etc. After all, criminals are also human beings, and so when they come across any of these type of, I mean, of course, from law enforcement perspective, it could be a honeypot, but that's again something where these guys themselves sort of often succumb to this lure of either anonymity or other security or any other thing, and at times they get trapped in their own web, so to say. So going forward, when you are looking at these type of issues, what are the main challenges that you see in terms of coordination and cooperation within India, I would say specifically between the law enforcement agencies and the financial sector companies? Because the fact is that, yes, financial sector is one of the biggest attacked sector. And of course, as per some of the news stories, out of 9 out of 10 cybercrime which is being reported, I'm not talking about overall, which is being reported, is related to financial frauds. Now, if that is the scenario, obviously it portends well that there has to be a strong cooperation between the law enforcement and the financial sector. And when I'm saying financial sector, it is not just the companies. It also includes, of course, the regulators within that particular space. So what is happening in this space, and what are some of the challenges that you see in this?
I would add to your 9 out of 10 is that maybe 9 out of 10 online financial sector crimes are not being reported also. So it is not 10%, it is, I would say, 1% of that.
Oh.
So in that sense, and why this is happening, and the basic cause, I would say, is the issue of trust. The absence of trust between different sectors, absence of trust, I would say, not only from the financial sector companies or regulators, but also absence of trust from the citizens also. How many victims are reported in crime? Because what is happening is, I have spoken to many victims. Why are you not reporting this crime to any law enforcement agency? And this is, I'm not singling out India, this is true across the globe. The main reason is that they do not see any benefit, because they say, will the law enforcement be able to bring back my money? Will the law enforcement be able to catch the culprits and bring consequences of them? And if the answer to both is no, then why should I report and get involved in all this paperwork just to build the statistics, which may be true, but is not helping our case in terms of, because how will intelligence be built because unless we get the details of what has happened? So this chicken and egg story and the issue of trust is there. Second important, again relating to trust, is the issue of use of data. what data is shared by regulators and financial sector companies with law enforcement and how it is going to be used. And that is an important factor on which various we have discussed so many things, what can be done, what safeguards can be built, but still that I would say that trust is, let me give you an example. Today, without naming a company, and I'm deliberately taking an example out of India. If we say a company was approached by one law enforcement agency to open a phone so that a terrorist attack could be prevented. The company did not open, saying that it would be a breach of privacy. That is okay, that I'm not questioning those policies, but the company advertising that directly or indirectly, saying that we did not share your data with law enforcement. It shows that we are very careful about your privacy. I imagine some physical case scenario where people used to take pride in helping law enforcement agencies. Here we have a situation where companies try to distance from law enforcement agency. And the main reason for that is trust. And this is what we have to, it is not only the rules, it is not only the technologies, it is not only the capacity of law enforcement, the basic issue which we have to tackle. And it may be of this lack of trust may be because of many reasons. Some of it being rightly attributed to what we have done or not done in the past, but those issues need to be tackled. That trust has to be created. Without that, it is a very difficult situation here. Deepak, I think you're on.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that the way this whole social contract between different stakeholders, unless that gets elevated in a trusted environment, these type of a siloed approach will continue to haunt us for a long, long time to come. Now, one of the questions that I have is related to what is it that should be done to enhance the awareness amongst the users at large. So what is it that the government, what is it that the regulators and the law enforcement, and of course the financial sector companies themselves do? Obviously, they do some mailers and they send some messages, etc. But what else can be and should be done in that respect so that we can mitigate some of these, if not all, at the user and the device level itself, rather than it getting perpetuated and then, of course, coming to these type of statistics that you just mentioned to us?
We have to recognize that a large percentage of our populations across the world are not digital natives, and they are not very natural users of digital space. As a result, they are not very comfortable. So whatever we do will be insufficient. We have to do more and more of the awareness exercises. Besides what we are doing, I have felt that probably there's also a need to do one more thing, and that is based on my experience, because I get so many calls from my relatives and friends and relatives of my friends asking that a typical thing would start that I've got a mail, what should I do? Should I claim this lottery or not? And this is despite, I'm not talking about 10 years back. This is very recent thing, despite all the efforts. Because what is happening is all these awareness exercises do work in the background. But when the time actually comes, when the person is faced with the situation where he has to exercise discretion or more has to be more careful, he needs somebody to answer his queries at that point of time. So I had earlier discussed when I was with Delhi Police some proposals in terms of running a call center, and not only run by law enforcement agency, it can be a more collaborative exercise with volunteers from private sector, from students students of computer science, IT, across different domains. And they can work in terms of sharing their time on this call center, answering these kind of these kinds of queries. So if my relative is receiving a call, instead of looking and trying to reach me out, he knows that call center number 1234 will answer these queries for me, and it is a globally known number, and everybody should try and answer this. So that one-to-one communication is what is missing. We have mass media campaigns, but that one-to-one thing is missing. Probably we can add that also, because that will help. Because each individual, when he is confronted with this kind of a situation, he thinks that his situation is unique. What has been advised is different, but this is very different. This is coming from a very reliable email ID, and all those kind of things come to his mind, and that's where he gets confused. So that guidance has to be provided.
So that's an interesting thought in terms of public-private partnership, the way you mentioned. And the last thing that I want to ask you, and I would request you for a very brief response, is what are the 2 or 3 things that you would suggest in the next 2 years that organizations like Internet and Mobile Association of India, and of course the law enforcement agencies in the country, and regulators in particular should be focusing on? So one, obviously, you did mention that apart from this whole mass media awareness campaign, we also need to provide this type of counseling services which are able to provide them support on a one-on-one basis. But any other couple of thoughts that you may have on top of your mind?
I would say that one space would be relating to the trust issue, which I mentioned, that there's need for collaborative work and bridging the gap in terms of fears in the minds of regulators, fears in the minds of associations, fears in the minds of private sector companies about their collaboration with law enforcement, and building policies and guidelines so that their fears are addressed, but at the same time, they do not give advantage. These fears and lack of trust do not give advantage to the criminals to exploit the citizens. Because at the end of the world, at the end of the day, if the user is cheated, it is not only the blame on the law enforcement agencies, it is also, I would say, negative reflection on the medium. People will lose trust in the medium also. So that also needs, so there's a need for more collaborative effort. We have to give up some of our historical fears in terms of what will police do, whether police will misuse it or those things have to be addressed. We have to provide safeguards, but we have to be sure that in order to improve the efficiency, in order to make this space more secure, all of us have to contribute.
So let me just close this particular session by thanking Dr. Oberoi for providing us this overview of what all is happening, giving global examples, but also very specifically some innovative ideas in terms of how do we approach this particular solution. So to me, it seems that as often people talk about cybersecurity domain, that there's a people, process, and technology, and people often happen to be the weakest link. But I think the way you are suggesting, and if we do implement some of that, hopefully people might become the strongest link rather than the weakest link. And with that, let me just thank you once again, and thanks to all the audience for their participation and their questions and interaction. And with this, I'll hand it over back to the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Maheshwari. We would like to thank our session partner, Refinitiv, Gold partner, Reacta, Bronze partner, Onfido, and Knowledge partner, EY.